They thought I'd stay gone. They assumed I'd vanish like a smudge on a mirror, wiped away and forgotten. And for a while I did. I let them win. I watched my name disappear from press releases, from the office wall, from the history of a company I built from the bones up. I remember the exact moment it happened. The night I was told I was too difficult to manage, that I had strong opinions, and they wanted a fresh voice to lead the brand I had spent 15 years of my life nurturing. I wasn't escorted out with security. That would have been too obvious. No, my exile came with soft words and forced smiles. A meeting that shouldn't take long. "We're going in a new direction, Evelyn." That was the line. And I, like a fool, nodded. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even pack up my desk. I left everything behind, like I was the ghost they wanted me to be. For 3 years, I disappeared, not in body, but in name, in credit, in legacy. They scrubbed me out of every award speech, removed my initials from the early design files. Even in board meetings, I heard from a distance that they'd whisper. She was just the assistant back then. But they forgot one thing. Ghosts don't stay buried, especially not ones like me. I used those 3 years to watch, to learn, to build. I traveled, yes, but not for escape. I studied international markets. I consulted under a pseudonym. I designed for others. I stayed sharp. And I waited. Not for revenge, no. I had passed the age of petty victories. I waited for the moment they'd need a savior, the moment the empire would begin to crack, without the woman who had poured her blood and heels into every inch of its marble floors. And last month, the email came. A confidential opportunity. A new executive role at the very same firm. A blind search. Anonymous candidates only. I knew exactly what I'd do. I clicked apply. But this time, I used my real name, Evelyn Carrington, the name they erased, the name they were about to remember. When I walked through those glass doors again, no one recognized me. 3 years, a change in haircut, new posture, and the kind of silence that comes from knowing you don't have to prove anything anymore. It was enough to turn me into a stranger. The receptionist smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I nodded. "Evelyn Carrington. I'm here for the executive interview." She scanned the list on her screen, fingers hesitating. "I don't see your name here." "Of course you don't," I smiled. "It's under EC Holdings." I was invited through the blind candidate process. Her brows lifted. She typed again. This time her eyes froze. And then carefully she said, "Ah, yes. You're in conference room B, second floor." As I walked past her, I felt it. The quiet shift in the air. Something about me unsettled people. Maybe it was the heels. Maybe it was the calm. Maybe it was the way ghosts return without knocking. I stood outside the conference room for a moment. Behind that door sat a panel of executives, some old, some new. A few had been my peers once. One had been my protégé. Another had tried to take credit for my work. I opened the door. 3 heads turned. Silence. Then a voice said, almost jokingly, "Do we know you?" I walked to the seat without answering, set my portfolio on the table, and folded my hands. "I think by the end of this meeting, you'll remember me." They shuffled papers, cleared throats, looked at my resume, disguised in acronym and abstraction. They saw results, not a name. I let them talk, let them ask questions, let them marvel at my metrics, my growth strategies, my market predictions. Finally, someone said, "You've got impressive insight for someone outside the industry." I leaned forward. My voice was quiet. "I'm not outside the industry. I built it. You just forgot to leave the lights on when you kicked me out." A silence fell over the room. One of them, the youngest, leaned back and said, "Wait, Carrington? Evelyn Carrington?" I met his eyes. The one and only. And just like that, the room shifted. They didn't know whether to stand or run, and I wasn't sure which reaction I enjoyed more. There's a certain stillness that fills a room when the truth walks in uninvited. They weren't expecting a resurrection. They thought I was buried under lawsuits, NDAs, and faded memories. But I was sitting right there, real, breathing, and unshakably calm. I could see it in their eyes, panic, confusion, a glimmer of respect they tried to swallow down. "Miss Carrington," one of them said carefully, "we weren't aware you were interested in returning." "I'm not returning," I said. "I'm reclaiming." I let the silence stretch until it grew uncomfortable. Then I opened the folder in front of me, revealing a single sheet. It was a pitch deck, 5 slides, lean and lethal. Growth strategies, global partnerships, brand resurrection. Things they'd needed but failed to achieve without me. The oldest exec, the one who'd once shaken my hand in an elevator and called me a promising assistant, tilted his head. "We're not sure this is conventional." "Neither is pretending someone never existed," I replied. "And yet, here we are." He shifted. "No one pretended, Evelyn. You left. On your own terms." There it was, the lie they loved best. "No," I said, voice sharp enough to slice. "I was erased. My name was taken off designs I created. My interviews never aired. My strategies were published under someone else's initials." I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive, placed it gently on the table. "This contains every time-stamped file, every internal message, every pitch I built. Dated, labeled, tracked. You didn't just forget me. You stole from me." Someone cleared their throat. The youngest on the panel, nervous, uncertain. "I read your work. Quietly. Behind closed doors. We all knew some of it was yours." The room froze. "Then you were complicit," I said, turning to him. "And now you have a choice. Keep silencing the architect of your success, or bring her back to fix the cracks." No one spoke, not for a long time. Finally, the man across from me whispered, "We'll be in touch." I stood, slid the flash drive back into my bag, and as I reached the door, I turned. "Next time you want to build a legacy, try not to start with a cover-up." Their silence followed me all the way down the hall. But my heels? They were louder than ever. The first time I left the building, I wore flats. It wasn't a style choice. It was survival. You don't run in heels. You don't fight for your dignity with blistered feet. You move quickly, quietly, and you disappear without echo. I remember the way the floor felt under my soles. Cold, hard, indifferent. No one looked up. No one stopped me. I wasn't worth a second glance. But this time I wore stilettos, 4 inches of sharpened resolve, each step a reminder that I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit their comfort. I didn't walk like a guest. I moved like an owner, like someone who remembered every detail of every hallway, like someone who had once drawn the blueprints on napkins over bad coffee, in rooms they wouldn't let me enter. As I walked out of that interview, people glanced up from their desks. A few eyes widened. One intern, God, she couldn't have been more than 23, whispered to her colleague, "Who is that?" Her voice wasn't mocking. It was curious, admiring even. I didn't answer, but I smiled. In the elevator, I checked my reflection. Not a wrinkle out of place. The years had been kind. Not because of luck, but because I had earned every line with grace and every silence with strategy. By the time I reached the lobby, I already had 3 missed calls. 2 from blocked numbers, 1 from my old colleague, Dana, the only one who had ever sent me flowers after I was pushed out. The message read, "Was that really you upstairs? If it was, damn, Evelyn. Welcome back." I stepped into the street, and the city wrapped around me like an old enemy pretending to be a friend. Same skyline, same ambition. But I wasn't the same. The old Evelyn had chased approval, had believed in handshakes and merit, had played by rules written by men in corner offices who thought kindness was weakness. But I had learned, you don't change the game by sitting at their table. You flip the whole damn board. My heels clicked on the pavement, rhythm sharp and deliberate. They were more than shoes now. They were punctuation, a declaration. I was back, and this time I was writing the ending. There was a door on the 17th floor. Frosted glass, brass handle, always closed when I worked there, unless someone important needed something. It led to the strategy war room, a place where vision was sculpted, direction decided, credit distributed. I used to pass that door every morning, coffee in hand, folders under my arm, dressed for a position I hadn't yet been given but already performed. I'd glance at it and wonder what it would feel like to sit at that table, to shape the next 5 years of a company I helped build. But they never opened it for me. Not once. I was young, creative, too passionate, too much. So they handed my ideas to someone else, usually a man in a better suit, and smiled as he pitched my work like it was his own. Then they'd walk past me afterward and say, "You're really good at making others look strong." And the worst part, I let them. I accepted the scraps. I told myself it was temporary, that I was paying dues. Now, 3 years later, I stood in front of that same door again. No folders, no coffee, no illusion. I raised my hand and knocked twice. A pause, then footsteps. The door opened slowly, and behind it stood Howard Sinclair, the man who'd once told me I was lucky to be in the room at all. His eyes flicked over me, registering recognition with a flicker of disbelief. "Evelyn!" I stepped past him, into the room, into my room. The table was smaller than I remembered. The chairs weren't as imposing. The air wasn't heavy anymore. It was stale, hollow. I ran my hand over the polished wood, then turned. "Funny thing about doors, Howard," I said calmly. "You locked me out of this one for over a decade. But you forgot something." He swallowed hard. "What's that?" I smiled. "It was my design, my layout, my strategy. This room wouldn't exist without me." He opened his mouth, but nothing came. No apology, no defense, just the cold breath of realization. I looked him straight in the eye. "You locked me out of my own house, Howard, and now I've got the keys." The invitation came in black and gold, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, a silent confession tucked into an envelope. The same company that once discarded me was now throwing its annual legacy gala, an over-polished event where people drank too much and remembered too little. Except this time, they remembered me. The invite didn't say, "Please come." It said, "Your presence is requested." I laughed when I read it. They didn't want me there to honor me. No, they wanted to soften the narrative, to show the world that there were no hard feelings, that I had returned like a loyal stray instead of a storm dressed in silk. I wasn't offended. I was amused. I knew exactly what I was walking into, and I chose my armor accordingly. Blood-red satin slit to the thigh, heels that could pierce through marble, and a face carved in patience and power. The ballroom was filled with all the usual suspects. Industry people drunk on their own reputations, men with fading ambition wrapped in expensive suits, women sharp as glass, smiling over flutes of champagne. And then there was me, the ghost they thought they'd buried, alive, radiant, and completely untouchable. Heads turned as I entered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Glasses hovered, hands froze. A hush rolled through the room like a wave recognizing the moon. I walked past them all, not rushing, not lingering. Each step louder than the music. The old CEO's jaw clenched. His new assistant looked confused. Dana, my only real friend in that place, raised her glass in secret rebellion. I stood near the edge of the room, watching the slideshow flicker across the screen, photos of the company's greatest moments. I wasn't in a single one. No pictures of me leading the first campaign that went viral. No trace of my designs. No proof I'd ever breathed within those walls. It was as if I'd never existed. Until I did. They brought out the legacy board near dessert, a timeline of contributors and visionaries. And someone somewhere must have grown a conscience. Because in the corner, bottom right, barely visible under the glare of the chandelier, was my name, E. Carrington. It was small, but it was there, and I smiled. Not because it was enough, but because they finally admitted I was real. They tried to erase me, but that night I haunted every inch of their celebration, not as a memory, but as a reckoning. Truth has a strange way of surfacing, usually when people get too comfortable pretending it's buried. The morning after the gala, I did what I always do, after battle. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and studied the aftermath. I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for erasure, and I found it. The company had already uploaded a photo album from the gala to their official site. Rows of glittering executives, champagne toasts, wide smiles plastered beneath cold eyes. They called it a celebration of legacy. But in photo after photo, there was no sign of me. Except I had been there. I stood beside the founder's son during the awards speech. I spoke to the press. I walked the floor in a dress that made more noise than the band. They'd edited me out, cropped at the shoulder, shadows carefully erased. One image had my reflection half visible in a mirrored wall. But even that had been blurred. It was surgical, deliberate, desperate. They weren't just trying to control the narrative, they were terrified of it. And maybe they should be. Because when you try to erase a woman who built her empire from nothing, you don't just invite a lawsuit, you invite a story. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years, Archive A. Thousands of files, early branding sketches, strategy outlines, voice memos from 2 a.m., ideas pouring out like water breaking through a dam. My voice, my fingerprints, my legacy. Then I went deeper. Screenshots of Slack threads, emails with timestamps, versions of campaign plans showing my name in the metadata, until they didn't. You could see it, the exact moment I started being removed from the record. My hands didn't shake as I compiled the file. They'd trained me too well for that. I created a drive, labeled it simply, before she was erased, and I sent it to one place. Not to them, not to the media, to her. A journalism student named Ria I'd once mentored for a week. She had fire, she had ethics, and most of all, she had nothing to lose. The message was simple. If you're going to tell a story about legacy, start with the woman they tried to delete. I closed my laptop, took a sip of coffee, and smiled. The past may have been photoshopped, but the truth, The truth was about to go full resolution. The irony didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, like sunlight through blinds. Everything they built, the campaigns, the slogans, the brand colors, the messaging they trademarked and wore like war paint. I designed it. Not in theory, not in collaboration, but alone, behind closed doors, while others took credit in conference calls. It was my vision they monetized, my story they tried to silence. And now it was my architecture they were using to rebuild their crumbling house. The reports were leaking out one by one. The company was struggling, investors pulling back, internal memos full of panic masked as optimism. And the gala? That was damage control, a flashy disguise for a structure cracking at the seams. And yet, the foundation was still mine. I could see it in their new branding, their attempt to reconnect with core values. Even the fonts they used were lifted from mood boards I created over a decade ago. They erased my name, but they couldn't erase the blueprint. Funny how that works. That week, Ria's article went live. It didn't explode immediately. No viral fireworks or screaming headlines. It was slower, smarter. The ghost in the hallway. Who really built Carrington and Co.? My name was in the subtext, in the pull quotes, in the screenshots. The article laid it all bare. Dates, files, the timeline of my disappearance. But it wasn't bitter. It wasn't even vengeful. It was clinical, factual, devastating. And that's what made it powerful. Within hours, my inbox filled. Not from the firm, but from people who remembered. Former colleagues, young designers, industry outsiders who'd studied my work in design school, never knowing it came from me. Evelyn, I always wondered why your name wasn't on the plaques. I used your 2008 campaign in my thesis. It changed my life. You taught me how to hold my ground in meetings. I never forgot. That last one undid me. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending my worth. I was being recognized, not because I demanded it, but because the truth finally had a witness. They made me the blueprint. And now the world was tracing me back, line by line. It wasn't an article. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't even a boardroom showdown. It was a whisper, in the most unassuming place, under fluorescent lights, beside a marble sink in a women's restroom during a tech summit. I was there for a panel, not as a guest of honor, but as a last-minute replacement, when one of the scheduled speakers caught the flu, a favor someone owed me, a quiet inroad. I'd just finished fixing my lipstick, when I heard the stall door behind me creak open. A woman stepped out, early 30s, sharp suit, kind eyes. She froze when she saw me. "You're Evelyn Carrington." I gave her a slow nod, unsure if it was admiration or accusation in her tone. She hesitated, then said, "I work for them. Carrington and Co." There was a strange sadness in her voice when she said the name, like it tasted wrong. "I know what they did," she said. "Everyone inside does." I turned fully to her. "Then why stay?" She glanced at the mirror, then away. "Because some of us are trying to fix it from the inside. Quietly." She reached into her blazer pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. "This is off record, but you should see it before they bury it." I unfolded it slowly. It was a financial memo, dated just 2 weeks ago, outlining a proposed merger, one that would completely shift control of the company's creative division. The terms were brutal, and hidden within them was something more chilling. Remaining brand identity will reflect original founding narrative, excluding disputed contributors, excluding me. Again, they weren't done erasing me. They were about to double down. I looked up at her. Why give this to me? She swallowed. Because I grew up on your work. Because my first internship was sorting through your campaign drafts without knowing they were yours. And because I don't want to see them win this time. For a moment we just stood there. Two women, a mirror, a war. Thank you, I said softly. She nodded, already retreating toward the door. They think they can rewrite the story. But some of us, we still remember the author. And just like that, she was gone. But her whisper, it lit a fuse I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The erasure wasn't over, but neither was I. The night of the merger announcement, they threw another gala. Of course they did. When power shifts hands in their world, it's not a press release. It's champagne and flashbulbs and rented grace. But this time, I didn't wait for an invitation. I created one. A well-placed call to a journalist, a few whispers to the right donors, and a last-minute RSVP sent directly to the firm's new communications director. The one too young to know better, and too hungry to question a name as heavy as Carrington. The theme of the gala was legacy in motion. The irony nearly made me laugh. I arrived precisely at 9:06 p.m., just late enough to make them notice, just early enough to make them sweat. The red dress I wore that night wasn't subtle. It wasn't elegant in the way they preferred. It was bold, cut like a blade, tailored to remind them that I was no longer dressing to impress. I was dressing to haunt. Heads turned like they always did when I entered a room. But this time, they didn't look away. The board was there. The founder's children. Howard, trying too hard to pretend his drink wasn't shaking in his hand. I walked past them all, straight toward the stage. There was no microphone, no spotlight, no announcement. I didn't need one. I stood near the center table where the new executives were seated. They froze, forks halfway to mouths, eyes wide like they'd seen a ghost. And then I said, just loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "You forgot to thank your architect." Silence. Funny, I continued, how easily a building collapses when you pretend the foundation never existed. Dinah was there too, seated farther back. I saw her rise slightly, like she wanted to cheer, but stopped herself. She didn't have to. The room was already listening. I leaned down, placed a small folder on the table, and said, "This is what legacy really looks like." Inside was a curated collection of proof. Campaigns, original sketches, time-stamped emails, even voice memos with my name in the metadata. Evidence, not bitterness. Receipts, not revenge. They tried to swallow their shame, but the room had already shifted. Conversations stalled. Photographers turned. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was the main event. That night the press didn't cover the merger. They covered me. The return of Evelyn Carrington. The woman in red who took her name back. They had erased me from history. But I had written my return in ink they couldn't wash away. I hadn't stood on a stage in over 5 years, not since the last time they let me open a product launch, right before they cut me from the marketing credits, and I found out via a blog post. Back then, I stood in the background. I held the mic, but not the power. I spoke, but my words were filtered. But tonight, I wasn't filtered, and I didn't ask for the stage. I took it. After the whisper in red made its rounds through the ballroom, the MC looked visibly shaken. He'd just introduced a partner from the new board when someone handed him a phone, probably with a headline too hot to ignore. He stalled, then scanned the room, as if searching for a way out. And that's when a voice from the back shouted, "Let her speak!" At first, I thought it was Dana, but no, it was the intern, the same wide-eyed girl from the first gala. Another voice joined in, then another. Suddenly, applause, a low rumble of approval, a demand wrapped in curiosity. The MC looked at the executives. No one moved, so I did. I walked to the stage with the ease of someone who had waited long enough. The mic was warm in my hand, the light soft but focused. I looked out into the room, then smiled. This wasn't part of the agenda, I began, voice steady. But then again, neither was erasing a woman from her own legacy. A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras turned. Phones were raised. I'm not here to expose anyone. That's already been done. I'm not here to reclaim what was mine. I've already taken that back. I'm here to remind every person who's been told they're too much, too loud, too bold, too ambitious, that your silence is never the price of success. I paused, let the weight hang in the air. They tried to bury me in footnotes, but I grew roots in the margins. And tonight, I bloom in the spotlight they said I'd never earn. The room stood still. And then it erupted. Applause, real this time. Not polite, not obligated, but earned. Some clapped slowly. Others stood. Even the old guard nodded, if only to themselves. And in that moment, I realized something. They couldn't erase me, because I was no longer a chapter. I was the spine of the story. Applause fades fast in most rooms. It echoes, lingers for a heartbeat, then dies as quickly as it started. But not that night, not that stage, not for me. It didn't feel like praise. It felt like justice. Like every hand clapping was erasing a line from the full story they wrote in my absence. As I stepped off the stage, people moved. Not away from me, but toward me. Executives who once averted their eyes now reached to shake my hand. Journalists pushed forward, asking for statements, for sound bites. I gave none, not yet. And then I saw it, projected on the ballroom wall behind the stage. A rolling list of names meant to honor the company's pillars of progress. Names that meant nothing to most. Until mine appeared. Evelyn Carrington in all caps, no initials, no asterisk, no footnote. The room quieted again. And when they saw me looking, someone at the projection booth turned up the brightness. As if to say, "We see you now." I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because I was beyond the kind of tears that come from validation. I had cried when they took it all. Now, I was too full of knowing, of reclaiming, of becoming untouchable. Dana found me near the back of the room, where the light was dimmer and the noise faded. She handed me a glass of champagne. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "They did it. I just survived long enough to outlive their edits." She raised her glass. "To legacy." I raised mine back. "To authorship." Because legacy can be gifted. But authorship, that's earned in sweat, scars, and silence, broken at just the right moment. As I looked around the room, at the young women standing straighter, at the execs nervously checking their phones, at the interns whispering my name like a legend, I realized something. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a mirror, a warning, a roadmap. They etched my name in applause. But I had carved it first, into the walls they tried to close around me. I used to believe the story was over, that my chapter had ended the day they pushed the door shut behind me and rewrote my role as supporting cast. But stories are funny things. They don't die when you stop telling them. They just wait for someone to speak them out loud again. That night, after the speech, after the champagne, after the applause that wouldn't let go, I sat alone in the back of a black car. The city lights flickered like memories outside the window. My phone buzzed. Ria, the young journalist. Her message was simple. You should tell it in your own words. Podcast, book, whatever you want. I'll help. No edits this time. I stared at the screen. It felt too big, too loud, too final. But also, right. Because somewhere along the way, my story stopped being about revenge. It became about return, not to a company, not to a job, but to myself. The next morning, I opened a blank document, title. They erased me. I wrote myself back. And I wrote. Not just about the betrayal, or the boardroom silence, or the coffee runs they pretended were promotions, but about the nights I stayed up designing branding strategies for people who didn't know how to build. About the moments I believed them when they said I was too intense. About the quiet rage of watching someone else pitch your dream like it was theirs. And then about the return. About the whisper in the restroom. The woman in red. The night applause became a weapon of restoration. I didn't write it for sympathy. I wrote it because the story had teeth. And for every woman still sitting in the background, biting her tongue and shrinking her brilliance, I wanted to say, there is a way back, even from nothing. Weeks later, I recorded the first episode of the podcast. Just me and a mic. No music, no production, just truth. It opened with one line. They told me I didn't belong in the room, so I built a bigger one. The downloads? They came faster than I expected. Emails from strangers, designers, founders, mothers, daughters, all saying the same thing. Thank you. I thought it was just me. My story, once buried, now lit 1,000 fires. And none of it came from rage. It came from finally being seen, not through someone else's lens, but in my own spotlight. The crown was never meant for me. Not because I didn't deserve it, but because I didn't fit their image of royalty. Too opinionated, too direct, too female. While others polished their crowns and passed them among themselves like heirlooms, I was down below, laying bricks, drafting visions, holding the weight of dreams no one else could carry. So no, I didn't steal the crown. I built the throne, the one they sat on when the empire rose, the one they pretended had always been there. And now that they've seen me reclaim my space, they've tried to rewrite the ending again. Invitations to consult, proposals to collaborate, carefully worded offers with phrases like, "We'd love to bring your voice back into the conversation," as if my voice had ever left. But I didn't return for their approval. I didn't need a chair at their table anymore, because I had already carved out one of my own, bigger, louder, and built to seat others like me. Young founders started reaching out. Women with ideas and no capital. Designers pushed to the side after doing the heavy lifting. Visionaries who'd been told they weren't ready by men who were simply afraid. And one by one, I started investing. Not just money, but time, belief, space. I launched an incubator, First Draft, for women rewriting their own narratives. No press releases, no men in suits clapping on stage. Just real people building what others said they couldn't. And one day, a former executive from Carrington and Cole showed up at one of our events. He looked uncomfortable, like someone walking into a house he once evicted someone from. He said, "You really created something here." I smiled. "I did. Without your resources, without your name, without your permission." He looked down. "The board, they talk about you now, with respect." "Tell them to keep talking," I said. But this time, let them be honest about why I'm not sitting next to them anymore. He opened his mouth to respond, but I stopped him. Don't apologize. Just remember, I wasn't chasing a crown. I was building the ground you walk on. It didn't come in an email. There was no card, no flowers, no dramatic public statement on company letterhead. Because people like them don't apologize out loud. They rewrite history in hushed tones. They send signals in silence. The first clue was a revised company bio, buried in the Our Story page on Carrington and Cole's site. Just 6 words, tucked between paragraphs, co-founded by Evelyn Carrington in 2007. That was it. No fanfare. No formal correction. Just the truth, slipped in like a guilty breath. The second came weeks later. A new campaign was launched, visually stunning, emotionally sharp. Everything I had once fought for. And I recognized the tagline. I had written it years ago in a pitch that was revised without credit. This time it ran exactly as I had written it. No changes, no stolen edits. And at the very bottom of the campaign page, inspired by the early vision of E. Carrington. That was the apology. Not a sentence, but a surrender. They didn't say sorry, but they said enough. And for people like them, that was an apology. Diana called me after it aired. You saw it, right? I smiled into the phone. Saw it, read it, screen capped it twice. You know, she said, for what it's worth, some of them really do regret what they did. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure I needed to. Because regret is useless unless it rebuilds something. But then I said, good, let them regret it every time they pass a woman in the hallway and wonder what story she's trying to write. And who's holding the pen? Because that was what this was always about. Not revenge, not fame, but authorship, ownership, legacy. And sometimes the loudest apology is the one that forces them to admit the truth, that they needed you far more than they ever wanted to admit. So no, I never got a letter. But I got my name back. I got my voice back. And I got a stage they couldn't take from me this time. And to me, that was louder than I'm sorry ever could be. You can always tell who envy clings to. It's never the loud ones, never the ones chasing attention or parading influence. No, envy dresses itself in restraint, in polite smiles, in tailored suits with clenched fists just out of frame. And that night it wore a tuxedo, midnight black, sharp lapels, pocket square, folded with surgical precision. Howard Sinclair, the same man who once told me I was too creative to be in charge. The man who pitched my design portfolio to the board with his name stamped across the top. The man who signed the memo that ended my career before he realized careers don't end, they evolve. I saw him before he saw me. He stood near the bar, laughing stiffly at something a partner said, glancing too often toward the exit. His drink stayed full. His shoulders stayed tight. When our eyes met, something passed between us. Not hostility, not guilt, recognition. He approached slowly, like a man unsure whether he was walking toward a handshake or a firing squad. Evelyn, he said, you look... I raised an eyebrow. Real? He gave a hollow laugh. I was going to say powerful. Interesting. You never said that when it mattered. A pause. Then he said what I didn't expect. I was wrong. I waited. He looked down. We built that place on your ideas. But we didn't know how to let you lead. And you were afraid of me, I said. Not cruelly, just honestly. Maybe, he admitted. You were always 5 steps ahead. And some of us, we weren't raised to follow a woman's lead. There it was, the confession wrapped in discomfort. I nodded, Then I'm glad I stopped asking for permission. He looked around the room, at the crowd orbiting me now, at the whispers still trailing in my wake. I never thought I'd see the day where they'd celebrate you like this. I smiled. You never thought I'd survive? He gave a small nod. And now, I said, stepping just close enough to lower my voice. You get to watch me build something bigger, something that doesn't need your name, or your tuxedo. I turned and walked away, heels sharp against marble, applause starting again from the stage behind me, because envy may dress in elegance. But I wore something louder. Victory. They called it a comeback, said I had returned, as if I'd gone somewhere. But the truth is, I was never gone. I was just uninvited, erased, silenced by omission, not disappearance. I didn't crawl out of exile. I walked through every storm they hoped would keep me away. And while they polished awards with my fingerprints on them, I was learning, growing, sharpening. You see, when they take everything from you, they think it will break you. But sometimes it clears the noise. Sometimes it carves the quiet needed to remember who you are beneath the titles and the paychecks and the desperate need to be included. I had never left the industry. I had simply stepped outside their frame. And when I re-entered, I didn't come through the door. I came through the foundation. That week, my story was everywhere. Podcasts, magazines, college lectures. Carrington Effect trended on social media. Not because I chased it, but because truth, once unboxed, doesn't need PR. I was invited to speak at a university, one I'd applied to and been rejected from at 22. This time I stood on their auditorium stage with students hanging onto every word. Don't wait to be remembered, I told them. Be undeniable, be documented, and if they erase you, leave traces so bright they burn their paper trying. Afterward, a young girl approached me. She looked no older than 20, with fire in her voice. They're already overlooking me at my internship, she said. They use my ideas, but I don't get the credit. I looked her straight in the eye. Good. Now you know how the game works, so don't just play it. Recode it. Keep every file. Mark every draft. Speak in rooms they don't want you in. And when the time comes, take up more space than they ever imagined you could. She smiled like someone who'd just seen a map. Because that's the thing about the woman they tried to bury. She didn't just grow back. She left a trail. And now others were following it. Not to find me, but to find themselves. I wasn't back. I had always been here, right where they left me. At the roots, at the core, at the beginning of everything they built. Fame has a scent. It isn't fresh. It isn't clean. It's layered, like regret sprayed over roses, like expensive perfume masking something rotting underneath. I never chased fame. That was never the goal. What I wanted was ownership of my work, of my name, of my story. But once my face started showing up on magazine covers and business blogs, once invitations came from people who once forgot I existed, it started to smell different. There was a gala in LA they asked me to attend, a fundraiser for women in innovation, sponsored by 3 companies that once rejected my pitches. They flew me first class, booked a suite, sent a stylist. The air at those events is always the same, heavy with ambition, laced with artificial charm. And in the corners, the scent of fear. Fear that the people they once stepped over might now be standing on higher ground. I walked the red carpet not to be seen, but to watch. The way some people flinched when they recognized me. The way others tried too hard to pretend they'd always supported me. One man from a major brand cornered me during cocktail hour. "Evelyn," he said, gripping his whiskey. "I always knew you'd come back stronger." "We all did." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. You called me emotional and unfocused in an internal memo once. I have the PDF." He chuckled nervously. "Oh, come on. That was years ago. Water under the bridge." I leaned in, close enough for him to smell the confidence on my breath. "Some of us remember the water, especially when we were the ones they tried to drown." He backed off, as they always do. Later that evening, during a panel discussion, they asked me how it felt to be famous. I looked out at the crowd, heels crossed, heart steady. "Fame is a mirror," I said. "And not everyone likes what it shows them. To some, I'm a story of success. To others, I'm a reminder of what they tried to destroy and failed." A pause. Then, "And you can always tell who's who by how close they sit and how fast they leave." The room laughed, but I wasn't joking. Afterward, I walked through the hallway of portraits, past black and white photos of women hailed as pioneers. Some I admired. Some I knew had climbed by stepping on others. There was an empty frame near the end of the wall. No name, no image, just a placeholder. I stood in front of it for a long time, because I didn't need to be in that frame.